The air in the Grand Astoria ballroom wasn't just filled with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. It was thick with the suffocating weight of one man's success, a success built on the ashes of my dreams. My ex-husband Julian Croft stood on a stage bathed in golden light, his arm wrapped around a woman who sparkled like the diamond on her finger. He called her his future, and me, I was the past he'd tried to bury. He invited me here tonight to witness his triumph and my irrelevance. But what Julian didn't know is that destiny doesn't write straight lines. And tonight, the final act of our story wasn't his to write. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, a thick card of ivory stock, the embossed gold letters of Croft Innovations, catching the weak light of Eleanor Vance's tiny studio apartment. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons to her own execution. The annual Innovators Gala was Julian's coronation, the one night of the year he celebrated his ascent into the tech stratosphere. For 5 years, Eleanor had been the one behind the scenes, organizing the caterers, proofreading his speeches, soothing his fragile ego when a product demo glitched. She had been the co-architect of his dream, the silent partner whose name was never mentioned. Now, a year after their divorce, the invitation was a cruel final twist of the knife. He hadn't sent it out of courtesy. Julian didn't possess that gene. He sent it as a declaration of victory. See what you lost. See how much better my life is without you. Eleanor traced the sharp edge of the card. The divorce had been brutal. Julian, with his team of shark-like lawyers from a top Manhattan firm, had argued that her contributions were emotional, not financial. The pre-nuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love and trust was ironclad. He got the gleaming penthouse overlooking Central Park, the portfolio of stocks that grew with every breathless news report about his company, the life they had built. She got a court-ordered pittance, most of which was devoured by her own legal fees and a profound bone-deep sense of being erased. Her life now was a study in contrasts. She worked as a research assistant at the New York Public Library's main branch, a quiet, dusty job that she loved for its anonymity and proximity to stories far grander and more tragic than her own. Her apartment in Queens was small, with a radiator that hissed like a cornered snake and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. Her biggest financial decision each month was whether to buy the expensive organic coffee that reminded her of her old life, or to put that money toward the ever-present student loan debt she'd accrued for the art history degree Julian had once called a charming but useless hobby. Her best friend Maria had been aghast when Eleanor said she was going. "Are you insane, Elle? Why would you subject yourself to that? He'll be there with her." Her was Isabella Romano, the daughter of an Italian luxury goods magnate. Isabella was everything Eleanor was not. She was a fixture on page 6, photographed at galas in Milan and yacht parties in Monaco. Her Instagram was a curated gallery of impossible beauty and effortless wealth. Julian had left Eleanor for her a classic, humiliating trade-up, the quiet, supportive wife for the glittering socialite trophy. "I have to go, Maria." Eleanor had said, her voice firmer than she felt. "If I don't, he'll think I'm hiding. He'll think I'm broken. I just want to walk in, show my face, and prove that my world didn't end when his got bigger." It was a lie, of course, or at least only a half-truth. Her world had crumbled, but a tiny defiant cinder still glowed within the wreckage. She refused to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had extinguished it completely. So here she was, standing in the marble-floored lobby of the Grand Astoria Hotel, feeling like a ghost. She had spent 2 weeks' salary on a simple, elegant navy blue gown from a consignment shop. It was beautiful, but next to the couture creations sweeping past her, it felt like a school uniform. Her hair was styled in a simple chignon, a trick she'd learned from a YouTube tutorial. Her only piece of jewelry was a pair of small pearl earrings, her grandmother's. Walking into the ballroom was a physical blow. The scale of it was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a diamond-like shimmer over the 1,000 guests. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly delicate canapés. And everywhere, at the center of it all, was the Croft Innovations logo projected onto walls etched into ice sculptures and emblazoned on a massive banner behind the main stage. Eleanor clutched her small handbag and kept to the perimeter, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw faces she recognized: tech journalists, venture capitalists, city officials Julian had charmed. A few of them met her eyes, their expressions a fleeting mix of pity and discomfort, before they quickly looked away. She was a relic from a past administration, a footnote in the grand biography of Julian Croft. Then she saw him. He was holding court near the stage, a magnetic center of gravity in a room full of powerful people. He looked incredible, dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than her apartment's annual rent. But it was the woman on his arm who stole the air from Eleanor's lungs. Isabella Romano was even more stunning in person. Her dress was a cascade of silver sequins that seemed poured onto her perfect figure. A diamond necklace, the famed Star of Sardinia, that had been all over the society pages, glittered at her throat. She laughed a musical tinkling sound and leaned in to whisper something in Julian's ear. He smiled a genuine, unguarded smile of the kind Eleanor hadn't seen in years. He looked down at Isabella with an adoration that was both a performance for the crowd and sickeningly real. He was parading his new life, his new bride, his new level of existence. And as he scanned the room, his eyes, cold and calculating, finally found Eleanor's. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. A slow, cruel smirk played on his lips. He lifted his champagne flute in a mock toast, a king acknowledging a peasant in the crowd. In that moment, Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Maria was right. This was a mistake. She was a fool for coming. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She turned to leave, to flee back to the safety of her quiet, anonymous life. But as she turned, a tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and kind, discerning eyes stepped into her path. He had the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise his voice. "Ms. Vance?" he asked, his voice a calm baritone. "Eleanor Vance." Eleanor blinked, confused. "Yes, do I know you?" "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, offering a small, polite smile. "I'm a senior partner at Blackwood & Sterling. I sent you a letter a few weeks ago. I was hoping we might have a word." The name of the law firm meant nothing to her. She hadn't received any letter. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person." "Oh, I'm quite certain I don't," Mr. Finch replied, his gaze unwavering. "My letter concerned the estate of your maternal grandmother, Seraphina Blackwood." Eleanor froze her hand on the ballroom door. Seraphina Blackwood. The name was a whisper from her childhood, a woman her mother had spoken of only in hushed, pained tones. A woman who had disowned her daughter for marrying a poor musician. A woman Eleanor had never met and had long presumed was dead. "My grandmother," she stammered. I don't understand." Alistair Finch's kind eyes held a hint of something more urgency. "Ms. Blackwood passed away 2 months ago. She named you the sole beneficiary of her estate. An estate of considerable size. The letter was an attempt to contact you before the public probate filing. It seems you've been rather difficult to locate." He glanced around the opulent ballroom, a hint of disdain in his expression. "I must admit this is not where I expected to finally find the heiress to the Blackwood fortune." The world tilted on its axis. Heiress, fortune, Seraphina Blackwood. The words echoed in the cavernous space of Eleanor's mind, drowning out the string quartet and the polite chatter of the gala. She stared at Alistair Finch, a man who looked as though he'd stepped out of a different century, his tailored suit and quiet dignity a stark contrast to the flashy tech money glamour surrounding them. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My mother told me her family wanted nothing to do with us. They cut her off completely." "Your mother, Catherine, was indeed estranged from Seraphina." Alistair confirmed, his tone gentle but firm. "However, you are her only living direct descendant. Seraphina was a complicated woman, Ms. Vance, but she was meticulous. Her will is unequivocal." He deftly guided her from the ballroom's main entrance to a quieter adjacent corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced hotel founders. The noise of the party faded to a dull roar. "I don't understand," Eleanor repeated, shaking her head as if to clear it. "Why now? Why me? She never even met me." "She followed your life from a distance," Alistair explained, "through private channels. She knew of your academic achievements, your marriage to Mr. Croft, and your subsequent divorce. She had specific instructions in her will provisions that were to be enacted upon her death." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "The Blackwood estate is not just a matter of finances, Ms. Vance. It comprises a controlling interest in Blackwood Holdings, a global conglomerate with assets in shipping, real estate, and philanthropy. Its net worth is substantial." He used the word substantial in the way one might describe the Pacific Ocean. Eleanor leaned against the wall, her knees feeling weak. All those nights she'd spent agonizing over her grocery bill, carefully portioning out leftovers, mending clothes she couldn't afford to replace. It felt like a scene from a cruel play. "There is, however, a condition," Alistair added, his voice bringing her back to the surreal present. "A test of sorts." Of course there was. A life-altering inheritance from a ghost of a grandmother couldn't be simple. A test. Seraphina valued character above all else. It was in her eyes the only true currency. She believed that great wealth could either build or destroy, and she would not see her legacy used for the latter. Her will stipulates that before you can take full control, you must demonstrate the very qualities she felt your mother lacked: resilience, discretion, and fortitude. She designed a final posthumous evaluation. Eleanor stared at him, bewildered. "And what is this evaluation?" Alistair glanced back toward the ballroom where the lights had dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of the evening's formal program. Julian would be taking the stage soon. She knew about this gala. She knew your ex-husband would be celebrating his success, likely at your expense. Her instructions were explicit. She wanted to see how you would conduct yourself in the face of public humiliation, whether you would retreat in defeat or stand your ground with dignity. He looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. "Tonight, Ms. Vance, is your test." Seraphina believed that how a person handles their lowest moment reveals their true worth. A bitter laugh escaped Eleanor's lips. "So my phantom grandmother is using my public shaming as some kind of final exam? That's monstrous." "It is unorthodox," Alistair conceded. But Seraphina Blackwood was not a conventional woman. She saw your divorce not just as a personal tragedy, but as a crucible. She wanted to know if the fire had forged you into something stronger. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so bizarre it had to be real. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a preordained moment. Eleanor's decision to come tonight, the defiant spark that had pushed her through the doors, suddenly felt less like her own choice, and more like the pull of an invisible string manipulated by a dead woman's hand. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice low and tense. "For now, nothing. Simply remain. Let the evening unfold. I will be nearby. My purpose here is to observe, and should the moment be right, to act as instructed by the will." His calm demeanor was strangely reassuring, a steady anchor in her swirling sea of confusion. Just then a hush fell over the ballroom, followed by a wave of applause. On the stage, Julian Croft stood at the podium, basking in the adoration. He was a master showman, his smile broad and confident, his gestures expansive. Thank you," he began, his voice amplified throughout the hall. "Welcome everyone to a celebration of the future. A future we at Croft Innovations are building every single day." Eleanor felt Alistair's steadying presence beside her. "Courage, Ms. Vance," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. Julian launched into his speech a well-rehearsed narrative of struggle and triumph. He spoke of vision and disruption, of paradigm shifts and synergy. He conveniently omitted the years Eleanor had spent working 2 jobs to support them while he coded in their tiny apartment, the inheritance from her father that had provided the seed money for his first prototype, the endless nights she'd spent as his sounding board and editor. In his telling, he was a solitary genius who had willed an empire into existence through sheer force of will. Eleanor listened, the old familiar sting of erasure replaced by a new cold anger. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the legacy of a woman she'd never met, a test of character she hadn't known she was taking. Then Julian's tone shifted, becoming more personal. Success isn't just about building great products. It's about building a great life. It's about knowing when to divest from assets that are holding you back and acquiring new ones that will propel you into the future. The coded language was unmistakable. The entire room knew he was talking about her. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes seeking her out in the shadows, a collective prurient curiosity. "And I," Julian continued, turning to Isabella, who stood beside the stage glowing under a dedicated spotlight, "have made the acquisition of a lifetime." He beckoned for her to join him. She glided onto the stage, the picture of perfection. He took her hand, lifting it to show off the colossal diamond ring. "I am thrilled to announce," he boomed, "that Isabella Romano has done me the incredible honor of agreeing to be my wife. She is my partner, my inspiration, and the new brilliant face of the Croft legacy." The room erupted in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, creating a strobe effect that made the scene feel even more unreal. Julian pulled Isabella into a deep, passionate kiss for the cameras, a perfectly staged moment of triumph. Eleanor stood frozen in the corridor, the sound of the applause like waves crashing over her. She felt the familiar hot shame rising in her throat, the instinct to turn and run screaming. But then she felt Alistair Finch's gaze on her. She thought of the woman named Seraphina watching from beyond the grave. Resilience, discretion, fortitude. She took a deep breath. She would not run. She would not cry. She pushed herself off the wall, straightened her simple navy dress, and with a quiet determination she didn't know she possessed, she stepped back into the ballroom. She would see the end of this test. Returning to the main ballroom was like diving back into a shark tank. The air was electric with the news of Julian and Isabella's engagement. People were clinking glasses, offering congratulations, and stealing glances at Eleanor, the ghost of Julian's past. The whispers followed her as she moved toward a small, unoccupied table near the back. "That's her, the first wife. God, how embarrassing for her to be here. Did you see her dress, poor thing? She looks so plain. Julian really upgraded, didn't he? From a librarian to a Romano." Every word was a tiny paper cut. In the past they would have bled her dry. Tonight they were annoyances, distractions from the monumental secret she now carried. Alistair Finch had given her an invisible shield. His revelation hadn't magically erased her pain, but it had reframed it. This was no longer just her personal humiliation. It was a scene in a much larger play, and she was unexpectedly its lead actor. She sat at the table taking a glass of water from a passing waiter, her hands steady. She watched Julian and Isabella move through the crowd. They were a king and queen receiving their subjects. Isabella was masterful, touching arms, laughing at jokes, her eyes sparkling. She was performing the role of the perfect fiancée, and Eleanor had to admit she was good at it. She looked over at Julian and Isabella, feeling his gaze, leaned in and kissed him again, a possessive, deliberate act, clearly meant for Eleanor to see. Alistair Finch materialized at her side, as silent and sudden as a shadow. "You are handling this with remarkable composure, Ms. Vance," he observed quietly. "I'm running on adrenaline and utter disbelief." Eleanor confessed, not taking her eyes off the scene. "Is this what my grandmother wanted? For me to sit here and endure this?" "She wanted to know if you had the strength to endure it without breaking," he clarified. "There is a difference. Breaking is reacting with anger, with tears, with public spectacle. Enduring is observing, learning, and waiting for the opportune moment to act." Seraphina was a master of strategy. She believed true power was never loud. His words resonated deep within her. For years she had been loud in her support for Julian, cheering his successes, fighting his battles. Her reward had been silence and dismissal. Perhaps Seraphina and Alistair were right. Perhaps quiet strength was the most potent force of all. The program for the evening continued. There were more speeches and award ceremony for Croft Innovations' top employees, and then the main event Julian used to burnish his philanthropic image, the charity auction. The auctioneer was a celebrity in his own right, a fast-talking, charismatic man named Simon Leduc, who cajoled and charmed millions of dollars from the city's elite every year. The items began simply enough: a week-long stay at a private villa in Tuscany, a custom piece of jewelry from a famous designer, a walk-on role in a Hollywood blockbuster. The bidding was fierce, with tech titans and real estate moguls trying to one-up each other, their egos as much on the line as their money. Eleanor watched, a distant observer. This was a world of such casual astronomical wealth that it felt like fiction, and now she was supposedly a part of it. The idea was so preposterous she almost laughed. As the auction progressed, Julian and Isabella returned to a large central table holding court. Julian, flushed with victory and champagne, was particularly bombastic, making large, ostentatious bids, ensuring the Croft name was attached to every major donation. "The next item," Simon Leduc announced, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "is one of profound cultural and historical significance. We are auctioning the naming rights to the new state-of-the-art research wing of the New York Public Library." Eleanor's head snapped up. Her library, the place that had been her sanctuary, her escape. The wing was a massive project, years in the making, designed to digitize and preserve some of the world's rarest manuscripts. "This is more than just a name on a building," Leduc continued. "This is a chance to etch your family's legacy into the heart of this city's intellectual life for centuries to come. The funds will go directly to the Endowment for Preservation and Access. We will open the bidding at $5 million. A hush fell over the room. This was the crown jewel of the auction. A paddle went up. $5 million from an elderly banking patriarch. $6 million came a bid from a rival tech CEO who shot a challenging look at Julian. Julian smirked. This was his territory. The library was just a few blocks from his office. It was a perfect highbrow symbol of his civic dominance. He didn't even raise his paddle. He simply called out, his voice carrying across the room. $10 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was a knockout bid designed to end the competition before it began. The rival CEO scowled and lowered his paddle. The auctioneer grinned. The formidable Julian Croft bids $10 million. Do I see 10 million going once? Going twice? Eleanor felt a surge of revulsion. Julian, who called her art history degree a useless hobby, who hadn't read a book for pleasure in a decade, was about to slap his name on her sacred space. His legacy would be built on the one place she had found solace from the wreckage he'd caused. It was the ultimate insult. She felt a strange calm settle over her. She looked across the room and caught Alistair Finch's eye. He gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal, the opportune moment. The auctioneer raised his gavel. "Sold for 10 million, 15 million. The voice was clear, calm, and carried an unexpected authority. It was Eleanor's. Every head in the ballroom swiveled in her direction. The silence was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of disbelief. People stared, their mouths agape. Who was this woman? The forgotten ex-wife in the consignment dress. Was this a joke? Julian's face was a mask of incandescent fury. He was being challenged publicly by the last person on earth he ever expected. He thought it was a pathetic, desperate stunt. He glared at her, his eyes full of venom. The auctioneer, Simon Leduc, looked utterly bewildered. I'm sorry, madam, did you say 15 million? I did. Eleanor said, her voice not wavering. She stood up, her posture straight, her gaze locked not with Julian but with the auctioneer. Julian, seething, shot back, 20 million. The words were a snarl. This was his night, and he would not be upstaged. The room was buzzing now, the atmosphere crackling with tension. This was no longer about philanthropy, it was a public duel. Eleanor didn't hesitate. 25 million. Isabella placed a restraining hand on Julian's arm, her perfectly painted smile now strained. "Julian, darling, what is she doing? Don't let her provoke you." But Julian was beyond reason. His pride was on the line. He was being humiliated by the ghost he thought he'd exorcised. 30 million, he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "And let's see if she can provide proof of funds for her little joke." A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. This was clearly a fantasy. The woman probably didn't have $30,000, let alone 30 million. Simon Leduc looked at Eleanor, his expression a mixture of pity and professional obligation. "Madam, Mr. Croft raises a valid point. For a bid of this magnitude, the House does require verification." Before Eleanor could speak, Alistair Finch stepped forward from the shadows. He moved with the unhurried grace of a man who owned every room he entered. He handed Simon Leduc a simple, elegant business card. "My name is Alistair Finch, senior partner at Blackwood & Sterling," he announced, his voice cutting through the din with effortless authority. "I am the executor of the Blackwood estate. I can personally vouch for my client's funds, not just for 30 million, but for considerably more." He turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Vance, the bid is yours if you wish to continue." Eleanor looked at Julian's apoplectic face. She saw the confusion, the rage, the dawning horror that his perfectly controlled world was spinning off its axis. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt powerful, a quiet, steady power that came from within. She addressed the auctioneer, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. $50 million, she said as calmly as if she were ordering coffee. "And my bid is final." The words $50 million hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of the Grand Astoria ballroom. A collective audible gasp swept through the 1,000 guests. It wasn't just a number. It was a statement of power so immense, so utterly unexpected, that it defied comprehension. Julian Croft stood frozen, his hand still in the air from his last bid, looking as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, which had been red with anger, was now pale with shock. 50 million. It was a figure even he would feel. It wasn't just a donation. It was a significant portion of his liquid capital. To match it would be reckless. To lose to her would be unthinkable. The auctioneer, Simon Leduc, stared at the business card in his hand, and then at Alistair Finch. The name Blackwood was not like the flashy new money names that dominated the tech world. It was an older name, a name whispered in the hushed halls of Wall Street, in the boardrooms of old-world corporations. It was a name associated with quiet generational wealth that dwarfed the fleeting fortunes of tech billionaires. Leduc, a man who understood the nuances of power, immediately changed his tone. His voice was now filled with a deep, resonating respect. "The bid is $50 million, he announced, his eyes now fixed on Eleanor with awe. "From Ms. Eleanor Vance." He looked at Julian. "Mr. Croft, do you care to counter?" All eyes were on Julian. The spotlight of his own making had become an interrogation lamp. He was trapped. He looked at Isabella, whose face was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, but her eyes were wide with panic and confusion. He looked at his business rivals, who were watching him with undisguised glee. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time he didn't see the mousy, compliant woman he had discarded. He saw a stranger, a woman with an unnerving calm and a terrifying confidence. He couldn't speak. He was publicly castrated, his power and wealth rendered insufficient in a single sentence from the woman he had deemed worthless. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. 50 million going once. Leduc boomed, his showmanship returning. Going twice. Sold for $50 million to the magnificent Ms. Eleanor Vance. The room, after a moment of stunned silence, erupted. But it wasn't the polite, obligatory applause from before. It was a roar of shock, excitement, and frantic speculation. People were on their feet, craning their necks to get a better look at Eleanor. Who was she? How was this possible? The whispers were no longer about her sad little dress. They were about the source of her impossible fortune. Alistair Finch leaned in and murmured in Eleanor's ear, "The second part of Seraphina's instructions, Miss Vance. Discretion is knowing when to be silent. Fortitude is knowing when to be heard. You have passed." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness, but she held herself steady. She had done it. She had faced the dragon in his own lair and emerged unscathed. As the auction concluded and the chaos of conversation erupted, the host of the gala, a well-known city philanthropist named Beatrice Vanderbilt, a woman whose lineage was as old and respected as the Blackwoods, made her way to the stage. She knew Alistair Finch well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice began, her voice calming the room, "we have just witnessed one of the most remarkable acts of philanthropy in this city's history. A $50 million donation to preserve our shared knowledge is simply breathtaking." She smiled warmly, not at the crowd, but directly at Eleanor. "Many of you may be wondering about our incredibly generous donor. While I know Ms. Vance to be a woman who values her privacy, I feel a clarification is in order, especially to celebrate such a monumental gift." She gestured for Eleanor to join her on the stage. With Alistair at her side, Eleanor felt as if she were floating. She walked up the small set of stairs, her heart pounding but her head held high. She passed Julian's table. He wouldn't look at her. He was staring at his water glass, his entire empire of ego shattered around him. Standing on the stage under the same golden lights where Julian had announced his new life, Eleanor looked out at the sea of faces. Beatrice Vanderbilt spoke with clear, deliberate authority. "Tonight's winning bid for the library wing was placed by Ms. Eleanor Vance. For those of you unfamiliar with her family's long and quiet history of patronage to this city, she is the granddaughter and sole heir of the late great Seraphina Blackwood." The name landed like a thunderclap. Blackwood. Suddenly it all made sense. The impossible bid, the presence of Alistair Finch, the quiet confidence. Eleanor wasn't the ex-wife of a new-money billionaire. She was the heiress to an old-money dynasty. She hadn't been punching up. She had been reaching down. Beatrice handed Eleanor the microphone. "Ms. Vance, would you care to say a few words about what you would like the new wing to be named?" Eleanor took the microphone, her hand surprisingly steady. She looked across the room past the stunned faces and found Julian. He was finally looking at her now, his expression a toxic cocktail of hatred, disbelief, and a dawning, horrifying understanding of what he had thrown away. "Thank you, Beatrice," Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong, amplified for all to hear. "The New York Public Library was a sanctuary for my mother when she had little else. It gave her access to worlds she could only dream of. Therefore, I would be honored to name the new wing after her." She took a deep breath. "It will be called the Catherine Vance Memorial Wing for Arts and Letters." She had not only claimed her power, she had used it to restore the name and honor of the mother Seraphina had disowned and Julian had disdained. It was a perfect, poignant checkmate. She handed the microphone back to Beatrice, and without a second glance at Julian, she walked off the stage. Her test was over. Her new life was just beginning. The aftermath of the revelation was a maelstrom. As Eleanor descended the stage, she was no longer a ghost, but the epicenter of the gala. People who had looked through her an hour ago were now desperate to catch her eye, their faces plastered with sycophantic smiles. Venture capitalists who had once dismissed her as Julian's wife were now mentally calculating the strategic value of an alliance with Blackwood Holdings. Alistair Finch acted as a shield, expertly navigating her through the throng. "Ms. Vance has had a rather overwhelming evening and will not be taking questions," he stated calmly but with an air of absolute finality to anyone who got too close. He guided her toward the exit, their departure as swift and decisive as her bid. As they reached the grand lobby, a voice raw and desperate called out her name. "Eleanor!" It was Julian. He had pushed his way through the crowd, his face pale and slick with sweat. Isabella was trailing behind him, her expression unreadable, her eyes darting around as if assessing the damage to her own brand. "Eleanor, wait!" Julian panted, blocking their path. "We need to talk." Eleanor stopped and looked at him. The man who had terrified and intimidated her for the past year now looked small and pathetic. His power, which had always seemed so absolute, was revealed to be a fragile construct, easily shattered by a force he couldn't comprehend. "There's nothing to talk about, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of the anger he expected. It was worse. It was indifferent. "Nothing to talk about." He scoffed, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "You pull a stunt like that, Blackwood. You never told me. All those years you let me think you were—" "What, Julian? Poor?" she finished for him. "I was poor. I knew nothing about this. Not that it would have mattered to you. You didn't value me for what I had. You devalued me for what I didn't." "That's not true," he insisted, his voice cracking. "We were a team. I made a mistake. This whole thing with Isabella. It was a lapse in judgment. The pressure of the company." It was a pathetic, transparent plea. He wasn't apologizing for hurting her. He was apologizing for miscalculating her net worth. Beside him, Isabella's face hardened. The lapse in judgment comment had not gone unnoticed. The luxury bride was discovering the price tag on her groom was subject to market fluctuations. "Your judgment is no longer my concern, Julian," Eleanor said coolly. "You have your new life. Please go and enjoy it." She made to move past him, but he grabbed her arm. "Eleanor, don't walk away from me. Think of everything we built." Alistair Finch took a half-step forward, his presence alone a warning, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop him. She could handle this. She looked down at Julian's hand on her arm and then back up at his desperate eyes. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice dropping to a low, cutting whisper that only he could hear. "I didn't build anything with you. I was the foundation you built upon. And when your building was tall enough, you decided the foundation was ugly and tried to bury it. But you forgot one thing about foundations, Julian. They are stronger than the structures they support." She pulled her arm free with a sharp, decisive movement. "Goodbye, Julian." She walked away without looking back. Alistair held the door open for her, and they stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the chaos of the gala behind. A sleek black town car, a Bentley with a discreet B on the hubcaps, was waiting at the curb. A driver in a crisp uniform held the door open for her. It was the Blackwood car. As she settled into the plush leather interior, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound, trembling sense of release. She hadn't just won a bidding war, she had reclaimed her own narrative. Inside the ballroom, Julian Croft's world was imploding. His engagement announcement had been completely overshadowed. His grand philanthropic gesture had been turned into a public humiliation. The journalists present were no longer writing about his company's success. They were scrambling to write the story of the century, the secret Blackwood heiress and the tech mogul who cast her aside. "What was that, Julian?" Isabella hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You told me she was nobody. You told me she had nothing. I thought she was—" he stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "How was I supposed to know?" "You're supposed to know everything," she shot back. "My father is going to hear about this. You made me, and by extension the Romano family, look like fools. We attached our name to a man who was publicly outclassed by his penniless ex-wife." The word penniless hung in the air, a mockery of the truth. Isabella wasn't angry because Julian had been cruel. She was furious because he had been stupid. He had discarded a queen for a princess, and in the rigid hierarchy of old money and power that was an unforgivable error. The foundation of their relationship, a merger of new tech and old luxury, had just developed a catastrophic crack. Julian watched Eleanor's car pull away, a symbol of a world he had brushed up against but would never truly enter. He had spent his life trying to climb to the top, only to realize he had pushed the owner of the entire mountain off the ledge on his way up. The unraveling had just begun. The days following the gala were a blur for Eleanor. Her name and face were everywhere. The story was irresistible, a tale of revenge, secret fortunes, and poetic justice. News outlets from the Wall Street Journal to People magazine ran features. They dubbed her the Quiet Heiress and the Ghost of Fifth Avenue. Paparazzi staked out her small Queens apartment, their long lenses a violation of the simple privacy she had once taken for granted. Alistair Finch and the Blackwood estate staff moved with swift efficiency. Within 48 hours, they had moved her into a secure, unlisted residence, a magnificent penthouse suite at the Carlisle, a hotel her grandmother had owned a majority stake in. It was a world of quiet luxury, of uniformed staff who knew her name but never stared, of panoramic views that stretched from Central Park to the distant silhouette of the Statue of Liberty. The transition was jarring. One day she was counting loose change for the subway, and the next she was signing papers that controlled assets worth billions. Alistair became her guide and confidant, patiently walking her through the labyrinthine structure of Blackwood Holdings. "Your grandmother was a formidable businesswoman," he explained one afternoon in the wood-paneled library of the Blackwood and Sterling offices. He gestured to a large framed photograph on the wall. It was the first time Eleanor had seen a clear image of Seraphina Blackwood. She was a woman in her late 60s with piercing blue eyes, silver hair pulled back in an elegant knot, and a mouth that looked as if it rarely smiled, but saw everything. She exuded an aura of indomitable will. She took over the company from her father in the 1960s, a time when a woman in a boardroom was a novelty. Alistair continued. She tripled its value by diversifying into emerging global markets. She was ruthless in business, but her philanthropic efforts were her true passion. She just preferred to conduct them anonymously. He slid a thick binder across the polished mahogany table. "This is the charter for the Blackwood Foundation. It is now under your sole direction. Its endowment is self-sustaining and currently valued at over $20 billion. Eleanor opened the binder. The Foundation's work was vast and global, funding medical research, building schools in developing nations, sponsoring artistic endeavors, and protecting endangered ecosystems. It was a portfolio of hope and progress. "Why me?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft. "After all the bitterness with my mother, why trust me with all of this?" "Because you are Catherine's daughter," Alistair said simply. Seraphina's greatest regret was her pride. She disowned her daughter for choosing love over duty as she saw it. She spent the next 40 years trying to rectify that mistake in the only way she knew how, by ensuring her daughter's child would never want for anything. She followed your life, admiring your quiet resilience, your dedication to your studies, your loyalty to a man who frankly did not deserve it. She saw in you the heart of her daughter, but the steel of a Blackwood. She believed you were the perfect synthesis. The weight of this legacy, this second chance for a grandmother she'd never met, settled upon Eleanor. This wasn't just money, it was a responsibility. It was a tool, and Seraphina had waited a lifetime to see what she would build with it. Meanwhile, Julian's world continued to crumble. The media narrative had shifted. He was no longer the brilliant tech visionary. He was the fool who fumbled a fortune. The story highlighted his callous treatment of Eleanor, casting a dark shadow over his carefully cultivated public image. His company's stock, once impervious, took a noticeable dip. Investors grew wary of a CEO whose personal judgment was so spectacularly flawed. Whispers of a board review began to circulate. The final nail in his coffin came from the Romano family. A short, terse announcement appeared in the press. The families of Julian Croft and Isabella Romano are announcing that the couple have mutually and amicably decided to end their engagement. The language was polite, but the message was brutal. Amicably unlikely. The Romanos had cut their losses, severing ties with a man whose brand had become toxic overnight. The luxury bride had been repossessed. Julian was left with a tarnished company, a broken engagement, and the public humiliation of having been on the losing end of one of the most dramatic stories of the year. One evening, a small hand-delivered package arrived for Eleanor at the Carlisle. There was no return address. Inside was a single worn, leather-bound book, a first edition of The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Tucked inside was a simple handwritten note. Eleanor, I suppose this is what they call irony. Congratulations on becoming the woman you were always meant to be. I am truly sorry. Julian. She held the book, a peace offering from a fallen king. He had remembered her favorite novel. A flicker of the old affection, a ghost of the man she had once loved, passed through her. But it was just that, a ghost. She placed the book on a shelf, a relic of a former life, and turned back to the work in front of her, to the future her grandmother had entrusted to her. The apology was years too late and billions of dollars short of meaning anything. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast a warm golden glow on the steps of the New York Public Library. A crowd had gathered for the official dedication ceremony of the new research wing. The $50 million donation had been fast-tracked, and the project was completed in record time. Eleanor Vance stood at the podium, no longer the timid ghost of the Grand Astoria ballroom, but a poised, confident woman addressing the city's academic and cultural leaders. She was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored suit, her demeanor radiating a quiet authority that had nothing to do with her wealth and everything to do with her purpose. Knowledge is the one true inheritance that can never be lost or stolen. She began, her voice steady and clear. It is a sanctuary in times of sorrow and a beacon in times of confusion. My mother Catherine understood this. Though she had little in material wealth, she possessed a richness of spirit and intellect that she found within the walls of this very institution. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze confident. Today we dedicate this wing in her memory. It is my hope that the Catherine Vance Memorial Wing will serve as a sanctuary for future generations of thinkers, dreamers, and scholars. May all who enter its doors find the same peace, inspiration, and boundless possibility that my mother once did. As she finished, the audience rose to its feet in a sustained, heartfelt standing ovation. Alistair Finch, standing in the front row, allowed himself a rare, proud smile. After the ceremony, as Eleanor greeted well-wishers, a reporter from the New York Times approached her. "Ms. Vance, an incredible day. There are reports that Blackwood Holdings recently acquired a controlling interest in a struggling biotech firm, pledging to redirect its focus to rare disease research rather than profitable lifestyle drugs. Can you comment?" "The Blackwood Foundation's mission is to invest in people, not just profits," Eleanor replied smoothly. "We believe the true measure of our success will be in the lives we change, not the dividends we earn." That was Seraphina Blackwood's philosophy, and it is now mine. She had spent the last year transforming herself from an heiress into a leader. She had dived headfirst into the work of the foundation, traveling the world, meeting with scientists, artists, and educators. She wasn't just signing checks, she was actively shaping a new legacy, one that blended Seraphina's strategic acumen with her own deep-seated empathy. Later that day, she received an alert on her phone. It was a link to a small business article. Julian Croft steps down as CEO of Croft Innovations amidst plummeting stock prices. The article detailed how the company, once a Wall Street darling, had failed to innovate, its reputation permanently damaged by its founder's public downfall. It was being sold for parts to a larger competitor. Julian Croft, the man who had erased her from his story, had now been effectively erased from his own. Eleanor felt a brief fleeting pang of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. His fate was of his own making. Her focus was elsewhere. She walked into the newly dedicated wing. The air smelled of polished wood and old paper. Sunlight streamed through the high arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. In the main hall, carved in elegant letters into the cool marble wall, were the words, "The Catherine Vance Memorial Wing." Eleanor reached out and traced the letters of her mother's name. In the end, it wasn't her ex-husband's name, or even the powerful Blackwood name that was etched in stone. It was the name of a woman who had been disowned and forgotten, a woman who had chosen love and had been punished for it. Through her, her mother's legacy was finally honored. Through her grandmother, a lifetime of regret was finally redeemed. And for herself, Eleanor Vance had found something far more valuable than a billion-dollar fortune. She had found her own name, and her own story was more than enough. Eleanor's story isn't just about the stunning reversal of fortune. It's a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by someone else's opinion of us. It's not determined by our bank account, our job title, or the person standing beside us. True value is forged in our character, in our resilience, when we face our darkest moments, and in the quiet dignity we maintain when the world tries to strip it away from us. Julian saw Eleanor as a liability he had to discard, but he was blind to the fact that her strength was the greatest asset he ever had. What do you think is the most powerful form of revenge? Is it loud public victory, or is it quiet, undeniable success? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. Thank you for listening.